Okay, so at this point, we're going to move on into our skill building session for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we are bringing back Anne and Kaitlin, if you were here yesterday. Today we're going to talk about hierarchies all around, addressing class, socioeconomic status, and rank. These issues will kind of play in a lot with some of the things we just talked about. So just as a brief introduction for those of you who weren't here yesterday, Anne Phibbs is the founder and president of Strategic Diversity Initiatives. She brings over 25 years of experience helping organizations advance their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. She is adept at assessing an organization's strengths and challenges and tailoring her approach to its context, culture, and goals. And we also have Kaitlin. Kaitlin is the Director of Client Support and Development at Strategic Diversity Initiatives. She brings more than 10 years of inclusive leadership experience and business innovation to the team. With a strong corporate background in crisis and change management, she is passionate about building empowered teams and organizational cultures that interrupt systems of oppression and marginalization. If you weren't able to join us yesterday, don't worry. You can still join the session today and catch up and review that recording when we share it next week. And I believe Liz is going to put a link to the handout in the chat that you'll probably want to have up for when we go into our breakout session. So this will be an interactive skill building session that I think you will all really enjoy. And so Anne and Kaitlin, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'll just say good morning or good afternoon, rather. And nice to be here again. I'm Anne Phibbs, she, her pronouns. I'll turn it over to Kaitlin.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kaitlin Desselle and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Client Services for Strategic Diversity Initiatives, and we're excited to be sharing with you today hierarchies all around. And before I proceed, are you going to be screen sharing or would you like that I do that?
I can do that. I'll do it right now.
Perfect, thank you. All right, thanks so much. So this workshop is going to fit nicely in the presentation that we just heard, which was really powerful. I was so thankful to be able to catch some of that. This is hierarchies all around. So we're going to be talking about addressing class, socioeconomic status, and rank. So next slide, please. We'll go just a bit here over our agenda for how we'll spend our time together. We'll do a bit of framing up in the beginning. There's a great video, albeit a bit dated, people like us, that really gives us some context around how we think about class and hierarchies that show up in society. We'll also have some time to dive into some small group discussion where we ask for you all to share your experiences with social class dynamics. We'll talk about wealth, inequality, and intersectionality of identities, including maternal health. And then we'll break into some small group discussion around social class and our work. So how does this apply in the workspace, in the organizations where we participate? We'll talk about rank and elitism, and particularly seeing some of the organizational power and positionality dynamics at play with another small group activity there. And then we'll have an opportunity to dig into a scenario where we can apply some of our allyship skills and kind of do a little role playing around what it would look like for us to act as allies in that moment. And then we'll leave you with some next steps, some kind of challenging classism and elitism opportunities for practical application in your future endeavors. So next slide, please. I think we'll go right into our video. Is that correct?
It is. And Kaitlin, I'm just going to jump in for a minute and mention, you know, it's not typical that we show videos that in this case are 21 years old, but take in for a minute when you watch this, and this will be like the first, it's a 9-minute very beginning of this people like us that I highly recommend. So I've literally been teaching this for over 20 years in classes and in trainings, and take in for a minute that our class system, if anything, is even more entrenched now. That it's not like, wow, we've come far in the last 21 years that we are relevant. So just wanted you to know that's why we're using something that's 21 years old. But I'll go ahead and share my screen. And if for any reason you aren't hearing this, Kaitlin, let me know.
Will do. Thank you.
He looks lower class, definitely. And if he's not, then he's certainly trying to look lower class.
Blue collar. Yeah, plaid shorts.
Lower middle class. Something about the screen door behind him.
Pitiful. Lower class?
I mean, look how high his pants are. My God. Like, okay. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. No offense. It's something he would do.
Upper class.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Look like he's a CEO of some business. The country club set, the picture of smugness.
The stereotypical, my family was rich, I got the money after they died, now we're happily ever after.
Yeah.
They don't really look that happy though.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dream, no request is too extreme.
It's basically against the American principle to belong to a class. So naturally, Americans have a really hard time talking about the class system because they really don't want to admit that the class system exists. But the reality is, it does. And sometimes it's based on looks and popularity, sometimes it's based on money, and sometimes it's based on how big your house is, or where your daddy works, or if your mother came out at, the infirmary ball in New York City. There are all kinds of measures of class in America.
Fate steps in and sees you through.
Somehow it's reassuring, to me anyway, to live in a house that I've been in all my life, and knowing that, my forebears lived here too. This is John Armstrong, the fellow who built the house, in general's uniform, the War of 1812. Over here is his wife, the former Alida Livingston. She had the money, he didn't have any money. This is Sam Ward here, who's my great-great-grandfather. Have a look at him. Oops, there's a veil today.
Fate is kind. She brings.
I wouldn't drive a Volvo. Volvo is plumpish, middle-aged, middle-class woman, too many children, an uncontrolled dog. I certainly wouldn't drive a Ford. It's probably stolen.
Like a bolt out of the blue.
I love for a salesman to show up on a job, hit a suit. He never comes to my job again in a suit. I've demanded they take their damn tie off and their jacket off when they're talking to me. And they do.
The sweet fulfillment of their secret.
Kind of preppy. Yeah, she's preppy, the one in the blue. He's dorky. Or loser. He was just preppy. His shoes are kind of like dorky. They're kind of like not in style and stuff. He's ghetto. These people coming up are dorks.
You wish your dreams come true.
America is a nation of tribes, and every American is a member of at least one of them. Are you proud to be called a redneck?
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. When you get a full-fledged redneck to say, oh, hell yeah, he really means that. You know what I mean?
I've been born and raised here.
They're the people we live amongst, the people who have similar backgrounds to ours, the people we feel most comfortable with.
There's definitely a level of people who have attained a lot of success in different fields of endeavor here, financial markets and different businesses, venture capital, .com businesses.
Like high fashion and finance.
That's pretty much it. Fashion and finance.
Our tribes can be defined by what we do, or how much we make, and also by our opportunities and aspirations.
Here's Banks again.
Mm-hmm.
There we are, right here.
That's on Dukeland Street, looks like. In my particular case, my father would always say, whatever you choose to do, just try to be the best at it. Wow. That's what my father used to say. So I'll support you in whatever you do, right? As long as it's legal.
As we move through life, we separate ourselves, often unconsciously, from people who don't fit in our group, who don't fit in our social class.
To me, there's some people who they could just have a bathing suit on the beach and I'd know they didn't belong.
Didn't belong?
Yeah, well, to a certain class. No, I don't mean didn't belong on this earth, but I mean just...
In fact, America is a country divided by class, split into 1,000 different social distinctions. The kind of neighborhood you live in, how far you got in school, the type of food you eat, the way you wear your hair. Class is everywhere, yet it's often hard to see.
I grew up in a small town, and the people who lived on the hill were the rich people and the most powerful people and the most respected people and the most prestigious people. And the people who lived at the bottom of the hill on the other side of the tracks were the know-nothings and the do-nothings, and that's how they were regarded.
It's a hard thing to acknowledge, because if there are social classes, well, then there must be kinds of inequality that you can't explain very easily, that just keep perpetuating themselves.
A generation ago, when you sent your kids to private school, was because you didn't like black people. And now when you send your kids to private school, it's because you don't like poor people. It's all about class. It's all about, I want my kid to go to school with the right kinds of people so that he can get into Harvard, or God forbid, because he's not that smart, which is usually the case, he'll get into one of those schools with one of those names, like, Sarah something or William something, or one of those schools. We'll get you in. We'll get him in. Give us some money. We'll get him in. But it's all about class.
Now we're going down into the dining room.
I think this is where your own personal sense of taste comes in very, very much.
And here we are in the dining room with Ben's grandfather, Benjamin Griswold Jr. It sort of gives me pause because Ben's looking more and more like him every day.
In this divided world, where do you fit on the spectrum of class and privilege? What group are you a part of? How have your own class attitudes shaped your life?
Tuscany had an influence on us, southern Italy too. The feel maybe of an old French country kitchen or an English farmhouse kitchen. Yeah, that's we incorporated a lot of those things in the feel of this. I think we tried to anyway.
It's a Mitsubishi 60-inch TV. We originally got it because we had a person in this house used to come here to visit us. She was shorter than the TV, so that would have been a great comparison.
Looking at class differences reveals basic things about Americans, about our hopes, our fear. In the great game of social class, we're all players.
Nouveau riche, cell phone, house in the suburb, kids maybe in a public school only if it's good, private school otherwise, vacation in the winter, vacation in the summer. When you got it, baby, flaunt it, so they flaunt it and let you know all about it. Lots of jewelry, maybe a boat, whatever it takes. I'm rich now, pay attention to me.
Sorry, I'm trying to pause it so we can get back to the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Go back to the PowerPoint.
All right, perfect.
The
Thanks
slide
so
come up?
much, Anne. Yeah, I'm seeing it here, the small group discussion. That's perfect. So admittedly dated, as we said, and certainly a few problematic language examples in there, but nonetheless, a great opportunity to take a look at how one of the persons interviewed said it best, which is that while we naturally organize ourselves into classes, that has to mean that there are some inequalities or inequities at play, and where some are being privileged and others marginalized.
Middle.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit of the audio from that video again. Oh, that's okay.
Yep. That's me trying to, okay. I think we're okay. Sorry about that, Kaitlin.
Socioeconomically, statistically, we are middle class.
All right, let's see.
I didn't fix it. Sorry, everybody.
Okay, no worries.
Sorry, it's still me. There we go. All right. Everyone, here we go. I think we're good now.
Sorry, and I may be experiencing
slide come up, Kaitlin?
lag. Not yet. Oh, here we are. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do now is break into some small groups and talk a little bit about our personal experiences with social class. So think about social class as described in this video clip. It's about where we live. So geographically speaking, it's about where we went to school or if we went to school. It's about what we eat, what we wear, what activities we take part in, who we know, and what messages did you get growing up about social class? This could be from your family or friends, from your others in the neighborhood, from the media, certainly. Did you get conflicting messages? So how did these messages resonate with your values, and how did those come through for you? And then how would you describe your social class now? Is it similar or different from that of your childhood, and how can you tell? So the video references this social climbing. So would you say that your social class now is the same as the way you grew up? And how do you think social class has affected your life and your career trajectory? So have you faced barriers related to social class? What were they? And have you benefited from privilege related to social class? If so, what does that privilege look like? So these are some prompts kind of to get us started, but certainly want to give opportunity for you all to dig into some small group discussion, and hopefully we'll have some time to come back to the larger group and hear some examples of what was shared. So Anne is going to put us into some small groups here, and I believe we're going to do that for about 10 minutes or so, maybe 8 to 10 minutes to talk, and then we'll come out to debrief.
Yep.
My group was actually having a really strong discussion on, because I was discussing how I came from an immigrant family and how hard we worked, even though we were in a lower social class, to quote unquote be white. Like that was a huge determinant of what social class I grew up in. And we never really fit in. We just never did. And I think it's because my family is, we're an immigrant family, and I was in a very predominantly white, wealthy area of California. But I gave the example, it was very simple, that I started out with one L in my name in Daniela. And then when, it all kind of started, we saw racism, for sure, it was changed to two L's. And it's just the little things like that to try and go up into a different social class. And it's just interesting to see the effort. That's kind of what we were discussing.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else we probably have time maybe for one more, if anyone else has an example from your lived experiences or things that you were aware of growing up and how that's impacted your career trajectory or your life now.
Our group also started talking off, I'll just do this really quick, sorry, how we talk about where we grew up. So if it's a certain part of town, like how you talk about it, if you show pride in it, or if you talk about a larger geographic area, which I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thought I heard someone else coming off of mute as well. Want to make time and space.
That was me. I was just gonna throw in of how my growing up affected my coming into adulthood. Of it made me very aware of how I didn't want to live my life. I don't know if other people had similar situations. Of I've been a lot more conscious and learned from the things that I saw my parents go through.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and I see a comment here that talks about how we have multiple isms that are multi-layered. So in just a moment, I'll turn back over to Anne and we'll explore a little bit of that intersectionality of social identities and that how that can contribute as well to hierarchies and class dynamics. So great. It sounds like there was some really engaging conversation. Thanks so much for your participation. And with that, we'll go ahead and screen share and dig into wealth inequality in America.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm just pulling it up here. So I'm going to start with a short video. This isn't as long as the one we just showed. And you'll notice this one is also a little bit dated, but I still think it's very helpful. And one of the things to notice about this, so this is from 10 years ago.
Me too.
And the wealth inequality that is that you will see in this video, and this is going to be even hard to take in, is even worse, right, than it was 10 years ago. One thing to recognize, if you don't already know, is that the richest people in the United States have only gotten significantly richer during the pandemic, and people who are struggling financially, people who are poor and working class, for the most part, are worse off after the pandemic. So this notion of inequality is well, it's a little bit dated here. It's every bit as real as it has ever been, if not more so. So I'll go ahead and share that video. And he's just starting out saying that there's a graph in case you missed that part.
I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
So I'll go back and say that I also don't agree with everything this person says, because when he says that it's okay with him that there are some people who are poor and some people who are rich, that's not what I believe. I don't see why we need anyone who has to live in poverty when we are such a wealthy nation. But so just to put that out there. But I think it's a helpful visual to think about how profound wealth inequality is in our country. So we exhibit wider disparities of wealth between rich and poor than any other major developed nation. And here just, some of those statistics of the more than 700 US billionaires, the richest 5, saw a 113% increase in their combined wealth during the COVID-19 pandemic. The most visible indicator of wealth inequality in America today may be the Forbes list of the nation's 400 richest. And in 2018, the 3 men at the top of that list, and many of us know these people, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett, held combined fortunes worth more than the total wealth of the poorest half of Americans, so similar. But here's where we also want to think about intersectionality, because it's never just about class. It's always about other social identities as well. The median Black family with just over $3,500 owns just 2% of the wealth of the nearly $147,000 the median white family owns, according to our racial wealth divide report. This is from inequality.org. And this is not just because, or at all, because white people work harder than Black people. This is about systemic racism that has inhibited the ability of Black people to own homes and to hold high-paying jobs, et cetera. The median Latino family with just over $6,500 owns just 4% of the wealth of the median white family. Put differently, the median white family has 41 times more wealth than the median Black family and 22 times more wealth than the median Latino family. If we think about how this wealth disparity impacts things like education, this is a 2018 report from the National Center for Education Statistics that just, I don't have time to kind of go into everything, but it points out how much money people who have it, middle class and upper class families, can spend on their kids, quite frankly, and how many people, children who are poor or near poor kids, are able to do things that grow them interpersonally, that grow their intellectual ability, that expose them to things. So summer camp and family outings, an art gallery, a museum, a historical site. In a paper published in the American Sociological Review, a research found that the most affluent Americans are driving this difference, spending even higher amounts of money on their children's education and enrichment, from after-school lessons to summer camps. And yet we want to believe this myth that everyone can, if they work hard, then can achieve in America. That's the American dream. If we look at maternal health and we look at the intersection, again, intersectionality, so we look at class, race, and geography. This is from the New York Times in 2021. I'm sure none of this will surprise you. You know this. We have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the developed world, and maternal mortality has increased almost 60%. I mean, that just shouldn't happen in a country with the degree of wealth that we have. A woman's chance of a healthy pregnancy varies greatly depending on where she lives, based on factors as whether she has a high school diploma, her exposure to poverty, her access to OBGYNs and midwives, and her access to abortion clinics. 1 of every 5 women of reproductive age in southern states live in counties with a high risk of death and other poor maternal health outcomes. And the problems are even more striking when comparing the risk for white women and women of color. Women of reproductive age who are American Indian and Alaska Native are 2.6 times as likely as white women to live under conditions that create problems during and after pregnancy. And Black women are 1.6 times as likely as white women to live under these unfavorable conditions. They are 2.5 times as likely to die during childbirth. Again, my guess is you know all these statistics, but we take them in as if it's a given that to be African American, to be a person of color, to be Native American, to be poor, to grow up in the South, and in particular, when you have the intersection of those identities, just means things are going to be harder. Instead of taking it that that's a problem that we have the ability to fix. So I'm going to put you back into small groups to talk about how these issues of social class show up in your work. We kind of started with how it shows up with you personally with the first talk. We're now going to talk about the work you do in maternal and child health. And then your third discussion will be about how class and elitism plays out within your organization. But right now, we just want to have you think about and talk about these questions. How do you think social class and all the way it manifests show up in your work? Do you work with people whose social class is different from your own? How do you think social class and economic access or lack of it affects the clients, students, and communities members you work with? Consider those you work with who are poor, working poor, low income, working class. What stereotypes and barriers do they encounter? And how does social class intersect with other identities and issues in your work? As is typical with us, it's too many, it's definitely too many questions to answer all at once, but choose the ones that you find most compelling. I'm going to go ahead and recreate the groups a little bit. Sorry, a minute. Give you about 10 minutes again to have that conversation, and I will open the rooms right now.
All right, thanks so much, Anne, for getting our groups back together. I see some folks still coming back in, so welcome back, everyone. Hoping that you had a really engaging dialogue, and we are going to move right ahead to rank and elitism and talk a bit about organizational, class, and hierarchy dynamics. So I'm going to give just a brief moment for folks to pop back in. I see some more joining us from small group. Welcome back in. All right. And they just closed up. So we should have everyone from our smaller group coming back in now. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and just mute those that are coming back in from small group, or please mute yourselves just so that we can kind of design for a bit of that feedback. Hoping you had engaged dialogue, and for the purposes of time, we'll keep moving forward and talk a bit about rank and elitism here. So rank is relative standing or position. So this relates to where you land within a hierarchy. And elitism is the belief or attitude that individuals who form an elite or select group of people with a certain ancestry, intrinsic quality, intellect, wealth, skills, or experience are more likely to be constructive to society, therefore have value to society in a different way, and deserve influence or authority greater than those of others. So by definition, elitism privileges some individuals, and by default would then therefore marginalize others who don't fit the characteristics of that group. Dr. Ingram of Penn State explains that within every organization, there exists a hierarchy amongst employees that create a class system in and of itself. So this can be based on a person's title or role, a specific position, department, or job functionality, and can often result in employees feeling sometimes like they are either a somebody in the in-group or a nobody, and therefore not in the in-group. Ingram rationalizes that rank is necessary within organizations. So it's important to have a clear understanding of leader dynamics and understand what's expected of you in role. That's a contributor of employee engagement, understanding what's expected of you and what agency you have, what resources you have within your role. But rank-based mistreatment can result in lower levels of job satisfaction and performance, and lead to lower levels of loyalty and commitment to the organization. Another way to think of that is lower levels of employee engagement. So here what we're seeing is that in addition to, certainly tied to some of those social identity dynamics that we've talked about today, within an organization, there are dynamics of positionality and power based on your rank or where you fall within that organization's hierarchy and dynamic. We'll progress forward here. Thank you. So here are some examples of how elitism can play out. So these are ways that we see organizational behaviors that create inequities amongst folks based on their levels of privilege or marginalization. Weekend and off hours events. So are employees expected to participate in events that are outside of what we consider normal working hours? Is enough notice given to these employees to make arrangements for childcare or elderly care or other responsibilities? Job expenses. So this is something that I have personal experience around and have always considered this to be an opportunity for creating more equitable practice. Are we expecting employees to front the bill to pay out of pocket for travel or work-related expenses and then being reimbursed in their paycheck later? For lower paid employees, this is often not possible. This results in detriment to their budgeting, and should instead be a proactive approach should be provided so that employees are not spending their own personal money then to be reimbursed for work-related expenses. or certain items that are helpful or required for the job, like a car, a laptop, a uniform, a cell phone? Are these things not being provided that would enhance job performance? So here we're seeing folks with considerably more wealth and financial security that would have access to these tools and resources, given an inequitable advantage to progress in the organization or to have better job performance than those who, due to their socioeconomic status or marginalization, would not have access to these tools and would not be equitably developed within the organization. Informal networks. So do company gatherings require a certain etiquette, or is there an unwritten behavior that it can impact a person's inclusion or comfort level, especially if this is something that is kind of socialized within a certain culture? So here we see plenty of cultural differences at play, and that some things that are normalized perhaps in American culture, not so much in other cultures. Is there a specific dress code required that would create exclusion for those that do not have access to formal wear, for example? And then think about location. Is your workplace accessible by public transportation, or arrangements made for those who don't have cars if public transportation is not available? Is it assumed that everyone has their own vehicle, a vehicle that's not shared? As we know, many family dynamics include multi-generational living within the same home and oftentimes share an automobile. And then levelism. So are there different rules, perks, or advantages for those at differing levels of the organization? And do individuals in leadership positions socialize or even greet those in lower positions, like male clerks? So this is something that we can see operationalized in plenty of organizations where there is this elitism, folks at the top who don't even have the expectation to value and humanize individuals that are perhaps in frontline roles or lower level positions within the organization.
Hey, Kaitlin, this is Anne. I'm just going to share a quick story of doing some training for a law firm. And they were, they wanted to train for all the attorneys and then all the staff, they called them, who were not attorneys. And they just started talking about how, well, when you come in and train the attorneys, we'll have to have lunch for them. And this one woman said, well, yeah, why is it that whenever the attorneys get trained, they get free lunch? And she said, but you never do that for the other staff. And this woman had just never thought about it. It's just what they'd always done. It's a perfect example of levelism. I mean, why wouldn't you feed everyone that you're training? But this woman there's a different expectation for lawyers deserve to be fed, I guess, as opposed to the lower staff. And it was just a perfect example of how this elitism is built into office culture, and people don't even notice it, but it sends a message about value. So I just thought I'd share that quick story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anne. Anytime that we have those kind of anecdotes, I think it's helpful to understand how this plays out. So yeah, let's go ahead and move on to our next small group discussion. So here we want to hear from folks, or actually, I think we're going to plan to do this as a large group. I think that's what we decided. So for the purposes of time, let's keep our larger group together. And I would love to hear from those of you that are willing to unmute and share a bit of your responses to these questions. So knowing that all organizations deal with issues of rank and hierarchy, consider how these play out in your organization. Where do you fit in this hierarchy, and how do you feel about that? What does your organization do to make sure everyone within the organization feels valued, supported, and respected, regardless of their position or rank, education, tenure, or length of time working? Be specific there. And is there anything more that your workplace could be doing to push against the ways that elitism and hierarchies affect organizations? So I'll give pause here and just ask for anyone who would like to share to unmute and contribute to the conversation.
Hey, this is Jean, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about something that has been on my mind for ages. And that is this issue of all of us trying to work on these things, but it's usually contract. We try to make a contract to do it, but it's often contact where the changes and deals are made, and they're informal. And a lot of people are not invited to those situations. You may go to lunch with a certain group, or if, males, I know they do this, like they golf and they make the decisions and things like that. So you're not there because, you might not be able to pay the green fees or the whatever, or a certain group of people. I see that informally happening because we're separated by buildings. If your office is next to mine, I can walk down and make that decision, and I bring it to the meeting, and it's like it's our idea, but it's not, and everyone hasn't been included. So with that, I'll pass.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Anyone else have experiences or thoughts around this prompt?
I have, I'm a nurse, so I no longer work in a hospital, but of course I used to. So one thing at the hospital, hospitals are very hierarchical, and so 2 anecdotes. One is just in general, there's a doctor's break room, and then there's the other break rooms for staff. Doctor's break room, no one else is allowed in except physicians. There's food, there's, TV, if you ever get a chance to peek in, it's much more plush than the nurse and housekeeping. And then another one, an interesting one from my brother-in-law, who worked for a short time as a lab tech in a hospital. He got a job and he loved to dress up and dress nice. And so he would go to work dressed in a nice suit and bow tie. And he was told, no, you cannot dress that nice. People will think you're a doctor. You have to dress down. You have to. So he thought he was, going in, making a good impression. And he was specifically told that, no. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So a dress code that kind of works both ways, very interesting.
Yeah.
And then of course, I've heard far too many stories of, especially sometimes men of color and women of color who are not taken to be doctors, but taken to be cleaning staff when they're wearing scrubs or something like that. So we make all these assumptions that are often related to race and class and rank.
To that point, I've often had to inform my students that I am not the maid, I am the supervisor.
Great.
Anya? Or Anna? I'm sorry if I'm reading
it's
it
okay. Anya.
Anya.
I have lots of examples. I think when we talk about positionality and behavior, I've seen this in my workplace or when I was in a different work area. The positionality that people would take around the manager, right? And so the closer you were to her, the more, I guess, privilege, we'll say, you were in favor, right? And that, we were just talking about that, and watching, if your behavior or even your dress, if you didn't dress well, comments were made about that, and this is just a fashion, they're just, expressions. And so, but it was really taken to be, and talked about negatively. And so it just created this kind of fear and anxiety around where are you falling in this power structure at any given time? If you hire, for example, peer staff, right, who may not have a degree, but they have lived experience. And then the one of the slides was talking about behavior or etiquette, right, that perhaps you don't know, but you're definitely being judged on, how you're behaving in these professional, what we, circles, which we know is, based on rank and class and race. And so you really see that at play. And I even think, with the pandemic, seeing how some employees, for some of the reasons you just said, for transportation, for caregiving, et cetera, work from home has really been beneficial, but upper leadership really insisting on we need to all come back together. And some of that being also about my this is just an opinion, about how much energy leadership is really willing to put into being inclusive. If you're not there right there in the office next door, like someone was saying, then you're not included in the decisions. And but that's not about them. That's because you're not there. That's not like because they failed to make an effort to include you. It's because you're not in the office. And so, we need to get you back. So those are my examples. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Great examples. Yeah.
Great. Well, we've got just about 14 or so more minutes. And so what I'd love to do is go ahead and move forward. We've got one more exercise that we'd like to do in small groups and give you opportunity to kind of apply some of your allyship skills here. So consider this scenario. You're planning an educational event, a panel presentation with a group of colleagues. Some in your group are researchers with advanced degrees. Some are staff members from different organizations, and some are members of the community. You notice that the researchers and those in more senior positions tend to be dominating the discussion, offering suggestions of people they know to serve on the panel. One well-known academic whom everyone refers to as Dr. Walker says, "I think it would be great to get some heavy hitters on this panel. I know some great experts in the field. I'd be willing to call in a few favors to get them to do this for me." A staff member from a community agency, Maria, suggests that it would be good to have a range of voices and perspectives on the panel, including people in the community. Maria continues, "I do hope we can pay participants we invite to speak on the panel." To this, Dr. Walker says, "Thanks, Maria. I'm sure we could find funds to pay one community member. It would be important to have their perspective, of course. Fortunately, most of the panel will be made up of researchers and academics who can give us their time for free." So here are the questions to consider with this scenario. What would you say if you wanted to address the issue and reframe the conversation? What would it look like to act as an ally in this situation? And how might your own social identities, such as race, class, gender, disability, age, sexual orientation, etc., affect how you would respond and how you might be perceived in the situation? How might your role within the organization affect how you would respond and how you would be perceived, excuse me. And so we've got about 12 minutes left. So let's go into small groups for maybe about 8 minutes, and then that'll give us some time to pull out with a bit of debrief and then discuss our next step exercise as well. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had an engaging dialogue. So we would love to hear from maybe one or two folks what you talked about in your small group session, and feel free to unmute yourself and share with us what came up for you. How would you act as an ally? How would you reframe in this particular scenario?
One of the things I'll just point out is how when we created the scenario, we kind of built in some of the, I think racism is often coded, and I think classism is often coded as well. So you may have noticed how Dr. Walker said, most of the panel will be made up of researchers and academics who can give us their time for free. No, actually, they're not giving their time for free. They're putting that on their vita, right, on their CV. So this is exactly what academics and researchers do, and it counts for them. So the idea that the community person needs to be paid, but these academic and researchers are giving their time for free, there's classism built into that frame, right? There's classism built into who gets a last name and who gets an honorific. So what is Maria's last name? We don't even know, but we know it's Dr. Walker. I know that plays out in healthcare frequently, as well as in academia. And the other piece is the idea of, I'd be willing to get a few favors. Heavy hitters, right? So is the community person a heavy hitter? Just the way that we code our language and the coded language builds in value. There's an inherent value in people who have titles, who have positionality. They get last names. They're referred to as Dr. Walker. We see them as giving their time for free, when in fact, the higher up you are, the more perks there are, right? Not to be too silly, but the $1,000 gift bags that people get for going to the Academy Awards when they make millions of dollars. My mother used to say, when you have money, you get more money. My mom grew up kind of working class herself, and she used to say the rich get richer. This was, you know, and I heard that growing up, the idea that that there's benefit to being well off and to being highly placed. And I think that's something we don't even question. Kind of
Well
built in.
said. Yeah, thank you. So we're about out of time now, but Anne, if you'll just throw up that last slide, I'd love to just part by leaving folks with this last kind of exercise for you to take forward and kind of think about and apply. So what can you do to address the ways that classism and elitism show up in your work? What can the organization do to address these things? And what barriers or challenges might get in the way of this work? How can you overcome these barriers and challenges? So we'll leave you all with that as a prompt moving forward. Thanks so much for your time today and for your engaging conversation. This was a really powerful dialogue, and I appreciate especially the content that was dropped in the chat here. Some really vulnerable sharing that we very much appreciate. So thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, and thanks for all you do. You do such important work out there. We really appreciate it.